Okay, guess we can begin. Last week, for those of you who were here, we saw a video about Chaim Lachar Mavet, life after death. The reason why I gave that video is an introduction for tonight's lecture, which is an explanation, a more in-depth explanation of the phenomena called NDE and OBE, near-death experience and out-of-body experience. And this follows the previous lecture where we spoke about the human being as part of the creation, the most important part of creation. The human being consists of the physical body as we see it, plus the essence of who he is, which is really the Neshamah, the soul. That Neshamah cannot be observed in real life, even though it is taught that it is he or she, the Neshamah, that makes all the important decisions. It is the Neshamah that makes all the important decisions, but most people are unaware that this is the most important part of the human being. And in the lecture NDE and OBE, one is able to be given a chance to see that there is actually something else other than the physical body. The video, I think, was important, and whoever has not seen it, I really recommend that he see it, because not only do you have testimony of people that underwent an incredible phenomena which was not understood or perhaps unheard of in the past, but you actually have testimonies and descriptions of something which is familiar to Jews. It is familiar to us because there are Mamarei Hazal, there are stories and descriptions of pretty much the same phenomena in Hazal, in other words, in the Gemara, in the Zohar, in the Midrashim. So we will see that there's no contradiction. On the contrary, it is a very good topic to discuss, because if anything, science today can confirm what we always knew, that the Neshamah is something that exists within us, and although we cannot see it, we can definitely feel it in certain ways. But in the phenomena called NDE, we're actually able to experience it. Most people do not get a chance to go back, or to go, to die and to just come back. In the experience called NDE, that is exactly what has happened. One of the things that will come out from this lecture, and what is of course the hope, is that one can see that the Neshamah is eternal, and that when one dies, he does not cease to exist, that there is something else after death. And it ends up that death is just a tahanat b'naim, as we call it in Hebrew. It is a stop in between this life as we know it in the physical world and the life in the world to come, or the life of eternity. This is an important topic to discuss, and that is why I included in the 70 questions, because it touches on one of our most basic beliefs that I mentioned a couple weeks ago, the belief in Hasharat HaNefesh, that the Neshamah continues to exist, that it's a separate entity, but also because of what we believe in Tchiyat HaMetim, that once, in other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to bring about the final Geulah, the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, one of those stages will also include the resurrection of the dead, which will also include the physical bodies, which is another topic that B'ezrat Hashem will cover at another time. It's an important topic also because of the many doubts that people have if there is anything else other than this life. People ask the famous question, did anybody ever come back from there? How could you prove that there is a Neshamah, that there is Olam Haba, that there is something else? Has anybody come back from there and to tell us that there is? Everybody goes and doesn't come back. Well, you're going to see various forms of coming back and actual reports of people who have been there and who have seen what they have seen. And there's a lot of information that we actually received from them, and a lot of the things that we know of what goes on there, other than Ruach HaKodesh and prophecy, is through the experience that people have had, either in a dream, in a real dream, or in this out-of-body experience. So what I'll be doing in the next couple of weeks, perhaps months, is we will be discussing various subjects that prove each on its own, that there is Chaim Lachar Mavet, that there is life after death, that there is something called a Neshamah, and the various ways to prove it today, even scientifically to an extent, is through this phenomenon called NDE, or near-death experience. That's number one. Number two is through a separate lecture that I will give about Dibukim, or souls that have possessed other living beings. Number 3, the appearance of Neshamot in real life, clothed with their original body, the way they once looked, even though they're supposed to be dead, they somehow appear in real life, in real form, not in a dream, but in real life. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be dead. This particular phenomena we'll discuss a little bit today too, because it does belong a little bit with NDE. So I'll discuss it with you tonight too. Then we have, of course, another lecture that will be about reincarnation, Gilgulei Neshamot, seances, and that is, of course, something which is forbidden by the Torah. That is the way some people communicate with the dead spirits, like coming together in a group and doing something to draw a dead spirit into the room so that they can communicate with them either through a medium, where they can actually hear the voice, or through letters moving on a Ouija board, as they call it, where they get answers to their questions. So, in other words, this is a method, even though it's a forbidden method to use by us, nevertheless, by others having used it, and by our rabbis telling that this actually exists as a way of seeing that there is a Neshamah, and that the dead can still somehow communicate with us, we could use it as an additional proof. Not that we need it, but it's additional proof. And then we have hypnosis or regression. The deep hypnosis and regression, they claim one can, if one goes into a deep regression, deep hypnosis, one can actually go back to a previous reincarnation. So that already somehow belongs with reincarnation, so we may talk about it when we talk about reincarnation. Whether you were here last week or not, I'll give you first a description of what Mavet Klini is, what near-death experience is, as they call it in English. Near death, meaning that it wasn't a complete death, but it was near death because many of the symptoms of death were observed by the doctors, who may have even issued their death certificate to the individual. They may have even put him in a cooler. They may have even prepared him for burial. And guess what? All of a sudden he knocks on the door, "Hey, get me out of here." So what happens to these individuals is there's no pulse, there's no heartbeat, and there is even no brain waves. There's no oxygen, therefore, getting to the brain. And when that happens for a number of minutes even, there's almost no coming back. There's too much damage done to cells, and usually that's death. That results in death, whether it was a drowning, whether it was a heart attack, a stroke. If all these symptoms are there, what else could you say? That should be death. And it is usually death. But sometimes people have come out of it. In other words, they have been clinically dead for all purposes, and as far as we know, he wasn't breathing, which, as I explained a couple of weeks ago, according to Judaism, that means that he's dead, and nevertheless they come back. Is that possible? It is, because we know it has happened. It's hard to believe.
Is there the longest amount? Do you know the longest amount that somebody was clinically?
That somebody was clinically dead? I think a couple hours.
No brainwave, no.
That we know today, but I will show you that this can happen even after 3 days. I will share with you something that has happened within 3 days. Now, does that mean everything was off for 3 days? I don't know. But that somebody can be considered dead for up to 3 days is a possibility, and I'll discuss it soon. Yeah. But when we're talking about near-death experiences, we're talking about experiences that have lasted 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, or a couple hours at the most, I think. Yeah. So what happens during a clinical death is that these symptoms, the symptoms of life, cease to function. And when they cease to function, the individual all of a sudden sees himself floating over his body. All of a sudden. Again, regardless of how it happened, and many times this happens in car accidents, but it could happen during an operation, during deep anesthesia, an overdose. It could happen through a heart attack, where he's in between the two worlds. We call it in between, but as far as the doctors, they might see the graph flat, instead of going up and down. So all of a sudden he sees himself floating over his body, getting closer to the ceiling, and he may be hanging around in the operating room for a while, after which he may float to something called space, and all of a sudden he sees himself traveling at a very high speed through a black tunnel, And after this black tunnel, he sees an intense light that cannot be described because it's not an ordinary light. Nobody can describe it as a real light because there's nothing in this world that comes close to describing that light, because it's a light that even though it's intense, it doesn't blind you. It feels warm. It feels like this light is an entity in itself, a loving entity, and these souls are being drawn to it as though it is about to absorb them. And there's somehow communication between this entity and the souls. And at some point, which not everybody sees, these souls, depending how far they traveled, are able to see their relatives who have passed away. And at some point, which they may or may not get to, they see their entire life like a video before their eyes, also in very high speed, from the moment they were born, when they were babies, went to kindergarten, up until the present. Now, what's interesting about this entire description that I just gave you, these are very detailed descriptions, right? These are significant events in a person's life, or significant observations. What happens when millions of people see the same thing all over the world? It can't be a dream. That's what the scientists are concluding, those who are researching this. Then it can't be a dream. It must be, if they all see the identical thing, that they must have experienced the same thing, and they must have experienced something real. And for those of you who saw the video, this is pretty much the explanation they gave for the basic experience that Goyim and Jews, everybody, millions of people all over the world have experienced. Now, I will say it at this time, and I said it at the end of the video, that there is obviously a major difference between what a Jew will experience and what a non-Jew will experience. And you will see why soon, because of an important step or an important stage where some of these spirits come to. Not only is there a difference between what a Jew will eventually experience, in other words, they may experience the same thing in the very beginning, but there is also a big difference between real death and near death. What we are discussing today, and what you saw in the video, was the observation or the experience of a near-death experience. In reality, what one goes through when he really dies with the Malach HaMavet, with the angel of death, is something different. So don't assume that what you've seen in the video or what you hear tonight is exactly what one is going to see after 120, even though part of it you most likely will experience. But the ta'alich, the process of going through from this world to the next, is quite different when one really, really dies. Well, first of all, when one really dies, he goes much further than these people have gone. In other words, these people have gone far. These Neshamot definitely have gone pretty far, but they have not gone too far. They all know at a certain point that if they cross that point, there's no return. In other words, they realize somehow on their own that they have to return. They are told that their time has not come, even though many of them are so comfortable and they like it so much. Imagine, don't have to pay any bills anymore. Everything is so calm, everything is so easy. There's no pain if they were in pain. So they like it up there. So many of them are tempted to stay, but somehow they're told the time has not come and they're pushed back into their body. Before you know it, they're surrounded with doctors trying to apply electric shocks to their chest to revive them. And all of a sudden their eyes open up and now they feel the pain of all the cuts and of the surgery and whatever other limitations they had before they went into that experience. What's interesting also is that many of these neshamot, who may have had some limitation when they were alive, like they were blind, all of a sudden they see that they're complete. They can see, they can hear, even though the seeing and the hearing is not like the way we see and hear. When they hear, it is telepathic. They can understand what that person is saying or thinking. It's not that they actually hear audible voice. That's a big difference, obviously, because they don't have ears and eyes the way we do. Nevertheless, they can understand everything that's going on. Not only can they understand, they can see everything that's going on, even in another room, because they're able to see through walls, or they're able to travel through the rooms. And many of them who have come back to prove the point, because nobody believed them, one sister tells the other, I overheard you in that other room crying, oh, please don't die, please don't die. How did she hear that? She, in another room, heard her sister say that. Either she traveled out, or she was able to somehow see through it. I mean, if somebody could describe all the tools in the ambulance where they were, and they could, their eyes were closed. They even, one of them, I think, even told the doctor, "You forgot the scissors inside of me." She said, what? Forgot a scissors? Yeah, they took an extra and they forgot the scissors there. Ty sewed him up and forgot the scissors. How does he know that? There's enough proof. Anybody who really wants proof, there's really a lot of evidence, a lot of proof. It's hard to really deny what these people have gone through. And as I said before, when millions of people have a similar experience and they all see almost identical things, there's something to it. One of the individuals in the video, it's very interesting, that presented Jewish witnesses, actually was able to know when he was floating or when he was in the upper worlds that his aunt has died. And he actually asked, by the way, I'd like to know how is she doing? And they say, why are you asking? He said, I just have a feeling that something happened. Is she still alive? They said, no, she had died. And that is how he knew, or that's how it was confirmed to him that his experience was a real experience. Otherwise, how would he know in the upper worlds unless he was there, unless he saw her there like he claims he did. Another very significant part of this experience involves those who have gone so far as to actually be in a Bet Mishpat, to be in a court of justice. As you know, there is a court of justice upstairs, and it works a little bit different than the one here. First of all, upstairs they're not corrupt, and you cannot use attorneys who are also corrupt, who are also thieves. Upstairs, your defense and your prosecution is really one's deeds. Ma'asim tovim, ma'asim lo tovim, your good deeds or your bad deeds. And they somehow surface as angels. One can hear the voices, because right before he gets to the Bet HaMishpat, according to what many have said, they actually can hear from this entity speaking to them, or somehow in some other way, all their deeds that they actually, whatever it is that they did, bad or good. Because they see a video, right? They see the pictures of everything, and they feel embarrassed. And as I've explained in the past, that the greatest Gehenom upstairs is the busha, is the embarrassment that one has for his maasim. Because the Neshamah, even though it appears complete, as far as the limbs, the hands, it appears very similar to the physical body, it does feel that it's naked, or it's stained and dirty as a result of its maasim, of its bad deeds. There is even a tradition that says that when one goes upstairs and he sees the relatives that had died, all of a sudden he comes and meets up with them, he can tell from the way they're looking at him, whether they're smiling or sad, how happy they are to see him or how disappointed they are with him, depending on what he did, what his accomplishments were in this life. So that stage is a very interesting stage, whoever gets to, because he's actually able to clearly see that, hey, they are completely aware of everything that I've done in this world. And even though that entity is a loving entity, nevertheless one feels terrible. One is ashamed of whatever it is that he did. He's being asked, what did you accomplish? What did you do with your life? Very, very difficult question. There is actually a tape that many in Israel have heard, but I don't know about you here in America. It's in Hebrew, about such an individual who has actually gone pretty far in his near-death experience through a heart attack that he had, where I think he may even have been in a coma for a while, where he relates the story of how they were very picky with every little thing he did. Remember, you once borrowed a book from the Bet HaKnesset, from the shul, you never returned it. They even reminded him something as small as that occurred so many years ago. I mean, I can go on, but I just don't want to get into that incident. There's a tape about it. He was interviewed on the radio. When he came back, and he made a certain commitment when he would come back, he would talk about this. He, I think, remained in this world an additional 3 months, after which of course he died. And he was in his mid-50s. He was a religious man. Nevertheless, they took his life apart. A religious man, a man who was in education, learned Torah, performed mitzvot, did everything more or less properly. Nevertheless, they took everything apart. Not that he has so many terrible things, but whatever it was, they took it apart. And he wanted a chance to correct those few things that needed correction, and they gave him that chance. And what came out of it was an incredible story of an individual who went through it and came to the point of Bet HaMishpat, where you actually can hear what he had to go through to defend himself, to explain himself, what they were expecting of him. It's incredible. Those who do not go so far, what they do see at least is their spirit or the Neshamah floating above their body, even though that body is completely in pieces. In other words, a leg is missing, the body is crushed if it was a terrible automobile accident. In other words, everything is maimed, exactly. Nevertheless, they can see, and some of them feel bad for their body, but they don't feel that they're missing anything. They can actually tell, this is not my real self. My real self is up here. And many of them are even confused what's going on, if they're not prepared for something like this. They never heard about this. To them, it's a big shocker. For those of you who were not here, in the video, the names of the researchers, the non-Jewish researchers that were involved were mentioned, the various books that were written. I actually read some of the books. That is how I came across this phenomenon in the non-Jewish world. NDE, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Raymond Moody, very famous writers and researchers in the topic. Another guy by the name of Stevenson. If you want a list of the authors and the names of the books, I have them with me. There's quite a few books that have been written, many researchers, many thousands of such incidents that have been recorded. People have been interviewed all over the world, and pretty much all those who were skeptic about it, I shouldn't say all, but many of the scientists and psychiatrists, doctors who were skeptic, came to a similar conclusion. All of these people obviously experienced something. What we'll do right now is go through a little bit of what the rabbis have to say, what is to be found in our sources, in the Gemara, in the Midrashim and Zohar, that confirms this, plus sheds additional light as to what happens. There is a very interesting passage in our tradition that talks about what goes on with the Neshamah right after she dies, right after the body, is being taken to be buried. There is a funeral. What goes on? Where is that Neshamah? What is it doing? And I may have discussed it a little bit in the past. I think we did actually when we spoke about the Neshamah. I'll just go over it briefly. The Neshamah actually is completely aware of the people who are there present at the funeral. The Neshamah can hear everybody, can see everybody crying for it. It is not so sad. It's actually maybe even happy in some ways. And you could hear the eulogies. Rabbis tell us, Hamet yodea akol, v'shomea akol ma shomrim alav. Everything that is being said about it, everything that is being said, the Neshamah hears and is aware of. So the Neshamah is there at all times. When you go over to the coffin, therefore, when you are present and you say something, it hears you. It's there. The Neshamah is there just like you would be in real physical life. The Neshamah is around during the 7 days of the Shiv'ah. It is in the house. It goes back from the cemetery to the house during the entire 7 days. I think it actually even says in one source that during the first 3 days, it is very close to the body at all times, for whatever reason. During the year, it's there, at the Bet Kvarot. You can go almost any day. You can talk to the Nefesh or Neshamah. For now, we'll call it the same, even though we spoke about the differences between Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshamah. As far as this lecture is concerned, it means the same thing. There was the spiritual entity of the individual. It's there during the entire year, after which it departs, goes to its final resting place. Only something is left over there, and the only time you can really communicate with it is during the Yortzeit, during the day of death, when people go to the Bet HaKvarot, to the cemetery, and obviously at that time you can pray and you can say what you have to say. Whether they can fulfill your wishes, of course, that's a whole different story. They can't they're limited to what they can do. But our custom has always been to pray by the graves of the tzaddikim, because tzaddikim, especially after they have departed this world, have tremendous powers. They have more powers after they have departed this world than when they were alive in a physical body. So going to pray by the grave of a tzaddik is definitely important. Just one needs to remember that we're not praying to the tzaddik, we're asking the tzaddik to intercede for us before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the days of the Gemara, the custom of burying involved putting the coffin or the body in a kuch. A kuch is, imagine going into a cave and making a hole in the walls of the cave. I forget the English word for it, for a kuch. A kuch is an aperture or an opening, a grave within the walls of the cave. You had a big cave, a deep cave, and in the walls you made kuchin. That's where you inserted the bodies. So the body is of course being entombed in the ground, but it's in a cave, in a kuch. And the halacha says something very interesting, that after you bury your dead, not everybody was buried like that, but some people used to bury like that. After you've buried the dead, during the next 3 days you would go check up on him. Maybe he's still alive. You see what I mean? During the next 3 days, today you don't have to do it. If they're buried underground, they're not coming out.
Even if they were alive.
Forget it. But somehow, in the kuchin, they would check on them. And there was one man, the Gemara says, that they checked on him, and he was still alive, and he lived for another 25 years. So I don't know if it was an older man or a younger man. But because of that, that's the halakha. You find it in the Shulchan Aruch. How come we don't practice it today? I told you why. Because even if he was alive, he's probably dead by now. Yeah.
Why don't we wait those 3 days?
In those 3 days, because maybe he's still alive.
Why don't we wait nowadays?
Why is the halakha very quickly, Rabbi?
No, that's the very, very quickly is halakha because of the kavod of the met. The majority of people are dead. When they die, they are dead. Unless, of course, something happens in between the time that we thought they died and the burial. But there's no more the prerequisite of waiting, as it was in the past, when somehow they they may still be alive for whatever reason. Yes. Yeah.
Did the non-Jews inherit this tradition, perhaps, and that's why they wait longer between death and burial?
No, I don't think they wait longer because of that. They just, want to display him in public. They have other reasons of why they want to wait. Yes. Yes?
Rabbi, you said, maybe clarify this. You said if you're in a hospital with some person who's a treifa and ready to, if you look very carefully, you can see the Neshamah exit the person. Is that true, Rabbi? Could you actually see the Neshamah exit the person, or is that something that I misunderstand?
Okay, I was going to say that a little bit later, but since you mentioned it now, I will talk about it now. For those who have been close to a person who's on his deathbed, dying, and for those who have been many times close to a woman about to give birth, if you're lucky, or if you have some zechut, I don't know what it is, you may be able to see the Neshamah leaving the body, like a little bit of a vapor coming out of the nostrils. And during the time of birth, you can actually see, if you are able to see, if you're lucky to see, you're actually able to see an image of the Neshamah entering through the head of the little baby that's just coming out of the mother's womb. Why some people see it, or why at times you see it, I don't really know for sure. But there's definitely something coming out and coming in that is sometimes observable. Yes?
I thought that the Neshamah was already in the baby while it's still in the mother.
Were you here 2 weeks ago when we spoke about the various... We spoke about the various parts of the Neshamah, right? The Nefesh, the Ruach, and the Neshamah. And we spoke about the stages where the Neshamah enters the body. According to our tradition, the Neshamah, or at least a part of the Neshamah, enters the fetus at the time of conception. That's true. But based on how we understand the Gemara, when the Yetzer Hara arrives, it is therefore also inferred that the main Nefesh enters the body either in stages as the fetus is developing, and or at the time that it is actually born, something enters him. Now that's something that for sure enters him, that may be observable, other than the nefesh, is called the tselem. So what I did say is that at the time of birth, an additional part of him called the tselem, like a shadow or some sort of form that closes him and that enwraps him throughout his life, that is when it enters. And that leaves him about 30 days before he dies. That same tselem that arrives at the moment of birth leaves one 30 days. And that is why when it leaves one, even animals can tell this man is a dead man. He's about to die within 30 days. The tselem is gone. The Neshamah itself, of the nefesh, most likely, like the tradition says, grows with the child as he's developing in his mother's womb, or at least a part of it arrives already from the time of conception, when the malach already decides what's going to be with his fate and his destiny. Tipazu matehe alea. What is going to happen with this neshama? So we're talking about different parts that may enter at different stages. Rabbis tell us that once the neshama leaves this world, one of the first stops it makes is in the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, in the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron. And that is why it's possible that the long, dark cave that they all describe going through could be the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. Again, I don't know for sure, but it could be that is what it's referring to.
Is that only Jews, Rabbi?
No, even the non-Jews described a dark cave, so there's no reason to believe that they don't go through there too. As far as the light, we have sources about the light too. There's a lot of sources that describe the Shekinah as a form of light. We're not talking about Hashem himself, we're talking about the Shekinah. And as David says in Tehillim, Be'or panecha yihallechun. So there is the or, there is the light that is emphasized in the various passages of Chazal, of our rabbis, that this is something that the Neshama is able to see upon leaving its body. An incredible light of sorts that is indescribable. So that is also in our tradition. Also in our tradition is that when the Neshama leaves this world, all its deeds come and pretty much appear to him. The Neshama is completely made aware of what it did in this world. Again, exactly what we said before, that they are shown a video or a movie of everything that they did, pictures of every part of their life. I guess the important part of their lives. I don't think they see a picture of all the times they took a shower. Obviously it means, the major parts of their life that stand out. Yeah.
What if they did tshuva, Rabbi? What if they did tshuva?
They probably see that too.
But that which should spare them the embarrassment of...
Yeah, then they're not embarrassed. It could be completely erased. It depends if it's completely erased. Maybe they don't even see it. You're right. That's a good point. If there was a real teshuvah, they may not even see it at all. Yeah. Another tradition that we have is that when one leaves this world, he actually sees his relatives coming to greet him. But what's interesting about these relatives is that many have said, and this is in the Gemara too, being able to see their relatives while they're still alive, on their deathbed, here's my teacher coming to accompany me. Here's my grandfather. I can see, my uncle is coming. Some of them who were able to talk, some of them who were in a higher zichut, a higher level, maybe were able to see and even talk about it while they're still alive. But this is again on their last day, approximately the last day or days of their life. Either way, it's at the very, very end. Many of them see, but they are not talking to us because they're in a coma. Yes?
My mom's client, right before her sister died,
Yeah.
the last word out of her mouth is, my sister's here.
Oh, really?
And she closed her eyes.
That's
That was
right.
the last thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And as I may have told you, that one sees the Malach HaMavet too, the angel of death, right before he dies. But it all depends on how the death occurred. If it was a sudden death, we're talking about a person who's on his deathbed, his eyes are wide open, who still has his senses, who's maybe able to communicate, then we're able to get more information from him. And also depending on his level, he may see more or less. What they all see, however, at approximately the time the neshama leaves the body, is the Shekinah. except for those who are punished not to see the Shekinah. That's a separate list of people, a separate group of people, but otherwise they all see something that we know as the Shekinah, which can be described maybe by the non-Jews as an aura, as a light. So that fits in with our tradition too. Let's go over a little briefly to, oh yes?
I heard that not everybody can see from
The Malach HaMavet? Yes, obviously. There's some people who have a death called the death of Neshika, a death of kiss in the middle of the night, which does not involve the Malach HaMavet, does not involve the angel of death. There are those who have died. It's a good question because I was going to talk about it later on, that a lot of the people who experience an NDE may have experienced it in a car accident. Now what happens in a car accident? There was no real Malach HaMavet involved. It was a sudden jolt. And the sudden jolt can cause the Neshamah to boom, separate itself from the body. Which is how we're going to understand OBE in a way too. But what happens in many of these NDE situations is a sudden jolt, boom, which separates, I don't want to explain it, I don't want to describe it like champagne, but that's what it does. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. When you take off the pkak, you take a boom, everything starts squirting out, Some action could have led to this sudden jolt or sudden shaking that somehow the Neshamah just cannot hold on to the body anymore, and it leaves. And that's what happens in an accident, in what they call in the medical world a shock that can bring this about. According to the Midrash in Parshat Yitro, when Am Yisrael was about to receive the Torah, which is this week's parasha, Yatz'ah parcha nishmatan, the Neshamah, from so much of a shock or the great experience that they were experiencing, the Neshamah left them temporarily. Hashem had to put it back in. And according to the Kabbalah, if we were actually to see malachim, angels, or even hear their music, our Neshamah would not be able to tolerate it. The Neshamah would just have to leave the body. In other words, there are things out there that cause this separation from the Neshamah from the guf, from the body. So that's a good question as far as how people die. For the most part, people die through the Malach HaMavet, whether they see him or not. And even though it may not be the Malach HaMavet himself, he has many shlichim, he has many messengers. And even car accidents don't happen just like that by themselves. It was obviously meant to be, and it came about through whatever agent Hashem used to bring that about. When a person loses control over the steering wheel, you think he just loses control. What if somehow accidentally put his foot on the gas pedal instead of the brake, which some people have done? You think he just did that because he did that? He forgot? He didn't notice? Obviously something made him do that. So in the end, everything is from Hashem. But how it happens may come about through different ways. Okay, now we're talking a little bit about OBE. OBE is not as common or not as familiar to many people as NDE, because OBE involves less of an experience than NDE. OBE means out-of-body experience, where you may be lying on your bed, not asleep, but half asleep. Not completely awake and not completely asleep. And all of a sudden you see yourself there on your bed. Hey, that's me. And you're close to the ceiling. This is a real experience that people have had. And some claim that you can induce it. You can bring it about. Anybody want to learn how to do it? I'm not going to teach you. Yeah. What? I have no idea. I don't think it's a good idea. It's risky maybe even to do so. But we have sources in the Chazal of individuals who have brought themselves to that state of OBE, but on a very high level. The regular OBE, or out-of-body experience, is where one sees himself over his body, perhaps in his home, maybe travels a little bit outside. Some claim to actually have crossed the Atlantic Ocean and went to visit somebody on the other side of the world and come back. I don't know. But we do have the famous, I'd rather not call it OBE because it could be something completely different. And that's called Aliyat HaNeshamah. We have something called in the Kabbalah Aliyat Neshamah, which is exactly what Rabbi Ishmael, Echad Asara Rugei Malchut, one of the 10 great tzaddikim who was killed by the Romans, did. Rabbi Ishmael Allah to the Shamayim to ask, what's going on over here? Is this a decree or should we try to stop it? And they told him, this is a decree, accepted, my kids, my children. So he actually did something to go up. In other words, his Neshamah went up to the Shamayim. How do you understand that? What did he do? It's called in Kabbalah Aliyat Neshamah. Those who know how to do it somehow can bring it themselves to raise their Neshamah while they're still alive, completely alive, to the Shamayim, to have a talk with somebody there and to come right back down. Now if you ask me what happens to their physical body at that point, I don't have a clue whether the heart is still pumping blood or not. Most likely it is. And I'll tell you why. Because OBE, the main difference between OBE and NDE is the fact that when a person has an OBE, he still has brain waves, his heart is still pumping, he's still breathing. Apparently there's still some life to him. And that is why the people who experienced OBE do not see or do not go as far as those who had an NDE. But at least they're able to see that something has left their body. Some even claim that they are attached with some spiritual cord that they can see to their body. Either way, an OBE is real. People have it. How it happens, people describe it as in a semi-conscious mood, that you're half asleep, half awake. And somehow the spirit begins to float. It sees itself on the bed, and after a while, boom, it comes back. Some want to say, some of those who have done researches on OBE, that whenever you have a dream that you're falling and you wake up like you just fell, some of you may have had that. You're falling in a dream, boom, and you wake up. Oh, like after a fall, you just had an OBE. In other words, that the Neshamah has left and has come back, and the coming back appears to you like the falling down because you're coming back into your body. I can't know for sure if that's real or not, but it may be. Okay. But many people have OBEs. The reality is, however, that according to Judaism, everybody has some degree of OBE every night when you dream, when you have a real dream, because a part of the Neshamah leaves the body to be able to experience those real dreams. Every night, the part of the Neshamah. Why a part? Because the body is still functioning. The heart is still pumping. You're still breathing. So it cannot be like an NDE where the entire Neshamah has left and everything stops. Oy baboy, right? So we know that there's always a little bit of an OBE. A part of this Neshamah is able to travel. And of course, depending on what mitzvot you did during the day, if one there's a list of certain ma'asim and mitzvot that if one performed during that day, he will have the zechut, not only to have a real dream, but for his neshama to go very, very high up there and be able to speak with those who have left this world already, or to speak to Eliyahu Navi, or to be in the yeshiva shel Mala. There's a list of several ma'asim that if one performed during the day, he will have that zechut. We don't have the time to go into what those ma'asim are right now, but there are individuals who have that almost every night or very often, depending what they do and how they perform, how they behave themselves. All we do know is that, and this is a separate lecture where we speak about dreams, is that not all dreams are real, but the ones that are, it is because the portion of the neshama has gone up there high enough to be able to see what it has seen. But that we'll leave for another time. So OBE is basically also a stage where the spirit or the neshama leaves the body, and no malach hamavet is involved. It is because of a jolt or because of a certain state or mood that the body is in that somehow allows that part of him to drift, to be able to observe himself in the body, but not to travel too far. Quickly, a few stories just so that you can see that our rabbis speak about it. There are stories in Chazal, in the Midrash, in the Zohar. One of them is a famous story with Rabbi Yosef, that Yosef passed away, appeared to have passed away young. He comes back, and his father says, well, I guess you were dead, but since you've come back, tell me, what did you see up there? So he says, Abba, olam hafuch ra'iti. I saw an upside down world. He said, what do you mean an upside down world? Those who are big shots over here, they're so small up there. Those who are small and humble here, they're so big up there. He says, that's not an upside down world. You saw the real world up there. Here's the olam ha-sheker. Here's where you don't see the truth. You didn't see it now, you saw a real world. So we already got some information from Rav Yosef. Rav Huna passed away. He comes back. How did you come back? How did they let you come back? He says, when I came upstairs, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells the Malachim, you know what? Since he's very forgiving to others, he's never makpid, don't be makpid with him on the din either. Let him come back. And he came back. Another very important lesson that we learned, not to be very insisting on your ways, but to be forgiving, to be flexible. The story in the Zohar about the Yenuka. Yenuka was a young child who lost his father at a very early age. And he cried and prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I won't have anybody to learn with. Please send me back my dad so he can teach me. And his father came back. An example of somebody who has left completely, but has come back. Within how many days, I don't know. There's also communication between the dead and those who are alive. Stories in the Gemara with Rabbi Eliezer, who even after he had passed away, he used to answer questions. They used to go to him, ask him, and somehow he would respond. There are various stories about conversations being overheard between the dead. Somebody went to the cemetery, it's Masechet Berachot. Somehow they allowed him to overhear the conversation between two people that were buried next to each other. And then another story with two brothers who were talking amongst themselves. A very famous story with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the author of the Mishnayot, who even after his death, for a while, would come home every Erev Shabbat and make the Kiddush for his family. Until the word got out and he says, no, now that everybody knows about it, I can't do it anymore. He stopped coming. Incredibly. Another story with a very important rabbi who helped his son after he had already passed away. A story with Rav Acha that yelled at those who were burying him, hey, be careful. He was already dead. And he was yelling back at those who were burying him. You might get yelled at soon. Zeiri, who went back to the cemetery, to a woman who had passed away, he had given something to her to watch over. She put it somewhere, nobody knows where it is. He went and asked her, hey, where did you put it? Where did you hide it? And I guess Zeiri was a big man, and he got an answer from this woman who had already died, where she had hid this object that she had put away. Many stories of Shemuel talking to the dead. We see that there has been continuous contact even with those who have already passed away. Yeah, no, that's Shmuel Hanavi. I'm talking about the Gemara right now. Yeah, not Shmuel Hanavi. Yeah. We don't have that much time left, but I want to share with you right now a very important part of tonight's lecture, and that involves those who have died, who have come back, or appear to us in real life, even though they were dead, as spirits, not completely coming back and living their life, but as spirits with some mission. There are many stories, and I'll just share three with you, three important stories. A very famous story occurred about 200 years ago in the city of Volozhin. There were two boys who were learning in the yeshiva, who were very close friends. One of them got very sick, and he needed to go back home. So his friend went with him. They stopped in the middle of the way in a hotel to stay over the night. In the morning, the boy who was sick realizes he doesn't have enough money to pay for the night. He was missing a couple pennies. And he told the owner, you know what, I'll pay you later. I'll send you the money. And the owner, of course, believed him. He arrived at home, and unfortunately, he did not recover from his illness, and he died. Everybody was very sad in the yeshiva. It was a very promising Talmid Chacham who was going to be a big leader, important boy. And before he passed away, he asked his friend to do him a favor. Here, take the money that I owe that innkeeper. On the way back to the yeshiva, please pay him. And he gave him the money. That other boy, forgot about it. One day, Rav Chaim of Volozhin is walking in the yeshiva, and late at night. They used to learn day and night. And it was late at night. He's walking to see how everybody is doing. down the hall, he sees that young man who had passed away coming towards him. Rav Chaim Roshan, of course, was not afraid. He says, Shalom Aleichem. Tell me, how is your deen, your judgment in the upper world? He says, Baruch Hashem. They found I was completely clean. He learned Torah all the time. They took me straight to Gan Eden, but on the way to Gan Eden, right at the entrance, the Satan stopped. He says, no, he owes money down below. And even though it's not his fault, that man needs to be paid. So he can't go in just yet. And they looked into his judgment, and they decided, since it's not completely his fault, they're going to give him a chance to come back down here to correct it. So I came to you, Rabbi, to ask you a favor, to please go pay the man the money that I really did pay, but it never got to him. And Rabbi, of course, promised to do so, and that boy never came back again. They gave him permission. They don't just give anybody permission. One story, an example of somebody coming back. Another story happened also a little over 150 years ago in some town, I think, in Russia, where this rabbi had given a room to an older man, an older fellow who was childless, no wife. That man learned Torah a whole day and a whole night in that room. The time came, of course, the man passed away. Sometime later, one of the sons of this rabbi goes into that room, and he sees that old man again leaning over his Gemarot and learning. And he got scared, and he left the room. Went back in another day, sees the same thing. He got scared. Now he told his father, what's going on? Father goes to the room. Sure enough, he sees that old man, and he says, please, don't come back anymore. Do me a favor. The kids are scared. A short story, but it shows something. Why? I don't have an explanation right now for this. At another time, maybe I'll go into it. Why that individual was coming back. But the greatest story of all is the third one that I'm going to tell you. And some of you may have heard it, but it pays to repeat. There was a woman, a very special woman, about 120 years ago, who did something very special. She was married to a wealthy man, and she decided to support a kollel, to give them money, on condition that they say Kaddish for all the neshamot that have nobody to say Kaddish for them. Beautiful. But unfortunately, her husband passed away, she became penniless, and now she had a big problem. She has to marry off her 2 daughters. What is she going to do about paying the kollel? She asked the kollel, please do me a favor, continue to at least say Kaddish until my situation improves. They agreed. But she's going down the street. She says, what am I going to do about my daughters? She's not completely depressed because she has hope in Hashem. All of a sudden she sees a man approach her with a nice, long, beautiful beard. Someone that she has never seen, looks very different than everybody else, very impressive. Starts talking to her about her problems, and she tells him about his problems. Says, tell me, how much money do you need to marry off your daughters? And she tells him, what do you need to know? Just tell me. And she tells him the amount. He writes out a check, signs his name, and then he says, you know what? Some people may not believe you, so please bring me 2 witnesses who actually saw me give you this check. So she calls 2 boys from that yeshiva to come, and they see him signing his name. He even signed another piece of paper with his signature, that they should have a copy of. And he says, go to the bank and deposit this check. She goes to the bank, and as soon as the teller sees the check and the amount and the signature, he becomes a little bit suspicious. He goes over to the president of the bank, and the president of the bank sees the check, and he faints. Now they lock up the woman, because they think maybe she's a forger. As soon as the president of the bank wakes up, he says, please bring the woman in. I want to ask her something. He says, where'd you get this check? I got this just yesterday from this man who wrote it, and I even have witnesses that he wrote it. He gave it to me. He starts showing her a few pictures. He says, can you point to this man? And she points to the man in one of the pictures. He says, that's my father who passed away 10 years ago. I had a dream last night. He was very upset at me, because he continues on to say, I stopped being Jewish, I married a non-Jewish girl, I have not said Kaddish for him, and the only thing that has helped him in the upper world, his Neshamah, was that woman's Kaddish, that woman paying the boys to say Kaddish for him. And he told me that if you don't believe this, I'm going to send you this woman with a check. Because he didn't believe it. He woke up the next morning and thought it was just a dream. His wife says it's nonsense. Therefore he said, I'm going to prove it to you. And she came with a check, and that's when he knew it was real. This man became a Baal Teshuvah, and his wife converted from this story alone. Incredible stories that prove that the Neshamah is for real, sheyesh din veyesh dayan, that there's a tremendous cheshbon for every maaseh that we did in this world. And therefore we have to be careful, of course, with what you do, that life continues in the upper worlds, that this is a temporary world, that this is not the real world. The real world, the Olam HaNetzach, the eternal world, is the Olam Haba. And B'ezrat Hashem, this is what we'll be talking about the next couple of weeks, Gilgulei Neshamot and so forth, which what they all have in common is they strengthen our emunah, that there is Hayim Lahar HaMavet, that there is life after death, Sheyesh Neshamah, that there is a Neshamah, and that this Neshamah, more important than anything else, will one day have to give an accounting for all its Maasim. In other words, the Maasim are very important. Every Maaseh, every deed that we do has tremendous value. From all these stories, and there are many more stories, we can see that they don't miss anything upstairs. They record everything, they see everything, they observe everything. And that is why we're still alive. We should be appreciative of the fact that we have been given the time to accomplish so much. So hopefully, Yiratzon, that we should use our time wisely. By the way, one of the two witnesses was Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, Chief Rabbi of Yerushalayim. Hashem will continue next week.